Delegates, please find your chairs.
Theo, would you like to come forward to pray?
Before the prayer, I'm going to do this prize thing. Before the prayer, we're going to have the awarding of some prizes, but only those who are seated at their desks are eligible. And Theo, of course. James Vanderland from Resonate wants to hand out prizes to those who he feels merited them. Could somebody give that man a mic?
Yeah, I'm good. Well, good evening. Be real quick. Thank you for those that came out last night to our R&R at Johnny's Cafe. Thank you for that encouragement. Appreciate that. Tonight, Calvin Seminary will be hosting, so be sure to check that out. And tomorrow's World Renew, so I'm sure they'll have a good time planned as well. For our event, we did do a draw, and there's 2 people that won a Resonate swag bag of goodies. So I want to draw your attention to these 2 winners. And so if Lisa Dykstra could come forward and take her prize. Hey, Lisa, how are you? And the other winner was Victor Larman.
Hey, Vic. Thanks, James. Just to clarify, I believe that the seminary reception is at the seminary, right? Yes. Right, not at Johnny's Cafe, just so there's no confusion. It's at the seminary. I trust that most of you know where that is. Right? Okay.
Good evening. Yesterday we were asked to recall our favorite Bible verse, and I used some of that for the prayer for tonight. Let's go to our Lord in prayer. Lord Jesus, we come to you expressing our dependence on you. And we pray that tonight you equip all the saints present here for the work of ministry and for building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine. So as we meet this evening, help us to speak the truth in love so we can do our part in building your kingdom and glorifying your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, just to review the order in which we proceed, we're going to begin tonight with 7B, financial matters, 7B. Depending on timing, then we'll resume with the list that we previously advertised, 9B, 4A. So that's our anticipated sequence. 7B, 9B, 4A. We have Drew reporting.
Yep. Mr. Chair, yesterday I mentioned that Committee 7 has a bit of a reputation for being uninteresting. And I just wanted to let you know how honored and excited we are to finally have made it to prime time.
There you go.
To start our discussion about reimagining ministry shares, the officers have granted permission to share a PowerPoint with you that's currently on the screen. And this just gives some overview of the process that's happened over the last 3 years, gives you a comparison between what the current system is relative to what's being proposed. And so these slides have been put together by John Bolt, and I share them with you. So the following is a brief primer that highlights the current and reimagined ministry share process. So the current process works like this, that the staff, that's denominational staff, creates a draft budget. That's submitted to the Council of Delegates and the boards to approve that draft budget. From there, so the board and the Council of Delegates approves that budget, and that's done before Synod. At Synod, then, the ministry share rate that is necessary in order to achieve the budget that's been approved is given to Synod and is requested, and you might recall that we did that yesterday. And then finally, the local churches then are requested to contribute an amount based on yearbook demographics, primarily active adult professing members. So the proposed process looks something like this, that the local church council sets a ministry share pledge. Classis then aggregates or collects the local pledges, not collect money, but collects information, and reports to denominational staff. The staff then creates a budget based on those ministry share dollars that have been pledged. And then the Council of Delegates and the boards will approve that budget. So let's compare these two. So the local church in the proposed process leads by setting its ministry share pledge rather than being told what is expected only after the budget is approved. And so under the proposed model, the church really is driving what that budget is going to be. And so how does that work on the local level? The council determines how the congregation has been financially blessed and is able to support the ministry. It does not assume that membership and financial capacity are linked. As ministry shares have been examined and reimagined over the last couple of years, there's been historically a link between membership and what's being contributed, and the new model kind of separates those two and doesn't assume that because you have a lot of people that you have a lot of money, or because you don't have a lot of people you don't have a lot of money. And so it's up to the congregations to determine, based on how they have been blessed, how they will in turn bless the denominational ministries. And then finally, it significantly increases the accuracy of the ministry share revenue projected in the annual budget. So if you've been a part of any of those conversations over the years, you know that we've gotten less than 100% of ministry shares for a long time, and I don't know the exact number of the past years, but it's been hovering at 60% or just below that. And so it's a little bit of a guessing game when that budget is put together, and the hope is that with pledges that are received, they'll have a better idea of the actual number of dollars that will be received. So this then aligns the ministry, I just said that, with the budget fiscal year July 1 to June 30, and we approve that. No, that's coming up, that's in this. Okay, current ministry share process is based on the calendar year. And then Classis is an active participant in the new process as it facilitates the evaluation of the local church pledges. This is consistent with the direction of Synod since the start of the ministry share system. And that goes back quite a number of years where there was a connection between the churches and Classis in terms of the ministry share process. So what is it that doesn't change? Ministry shares remain the most cost-effective and efficient way for churches to directly support the ministry of the denomination. Just to give you an idea, ministry shares, the overhead cost to administer ministry shares is roughly 2 cents on the dollar. If you were to have an advancement person at raising that same amount of money, you would spend about 25 cents on the dollar. And so there's a fair amount of efficiency that's part of this system, and that is not intended to change. And then through ministry share giving, every member of the congregation, no matter their financial capacity, can participate in the support of the ministry. And so there's no sense of, we can't afford the rate that we've been given, we better just not give anything. we're asking for gifts, and every congregation is then given the charge or the responsibility to come up with what that gift will be. So then I'll turn your attention to Advisory Committee Report 7B and the recommendations that come from the Advisory Committee. You might think that this was a bunch of numbers people, and so we wouldn't really be all concerned about the grammar. However, I want to assure you that we did have some conversations about prepositions and parallel structure. We may not have caught them all, so we're open to suggestions. All right, here we go. The recommendation is that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented in Appendix J and address the following recommendations with regard to the report. And I'd like to take those one at a time. Letter A, that Synod, 1, move the ministry share year from a calendar year setting to that of the fiscal year July 1 through June 30, effective July 1, 2021. And 2, that Synod 2020 adopt a ministry share rate for the period January 1, 2021 to June 30, 2021 to facilitate the transition to a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. So moved.
It's not necessary to support because the motion is being brought from a committee, and so it comes to the floor supported once it's moved by the reporter. But anyway, your support is appreciated. Now we're open for further discussion through the queue. Any speakers? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. That's carried.
Letter B, that Synod, first, should request church councils to prayerfully consider their response to the ministry share request for the period July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022. And second, instruct the classes beginning at their fall 2020 meetings to dedicate sufficient time to consider the ministry share contributions projected by each church for the coming fiscal year, and, working with the assembly, determine the best way to maximize the pledge support for denominational ministry. The level of pledge support is to be reported to the denominational offices not later than February 1, 2021. This process should be repeated annually. I so move.
Recommendation B is before you. Discussion to this recommendation? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. It's carried.
Letter C, that Synod instruct the council delegates to provide a communication to the churches giving guidance as they consider their pledge. The guidance should consist of the following. First, material to communicate the denomination's vision for ministry enabled through ministry shares. And secondly, examples of possible methods to consider in determining the church's pledge amount, including but not limited to percentage of income, rate per person based on average worship attendance, percentage increase above the prior year gift. So moved.
Recommendation C. Anyone wish to address recommendation C? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. It's carried.
Letter D, that Synod encourage the churches to commit to support Calvin College and the 4 regional Christian higher educational institutions, ones that we just talked about earlier, Redeemer University College, the King's University, Trinity Christian College, and Dordt University, at the same or greater amount as the support previously requested through ministry shares and direct gifts. Gifts to Calvin College would continue to be processed as part of the ministry share system, while gifts to the area educational institutions would continue to be contributed directly to the schools. So moved.
Recommendation D. Does anyone wish to speak to this motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
Letter E, that Synod circulate the Reimagining Ministry Share report as presented by the Council of Delegates, along with the suggested guidance, to congregations and classes, and encourage its study with assistance available from the appropriate denominational staff for each context. So moved.
Recommendation E is before you.
So I realize that the committee spent a lot of time crafting these sentences so they would dance together. The intro sentence to all of these specific recommendations is that Synod adopt the report. Are we coming to that, or could we weave that into E in the manner as I'll suggest right now, that Synod instruct the ED to circulate the report as adopted by Synod and presented by the COD along with.
I'm okay with that.
I just want to make sure that the report is adopted because, we have a series of recommendations that all fit together, but if we're going to circulate the report, it ought to have Synod's blessing as well.
Adopted,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
There's a suggestion for a slightly modified wording. There's concurrence between the last speaker and the reporter. We have an opportunity to, here it comes. So it would say, as adopted by Synod.
As presented by the COD and adopted by Synod. So
Wait for a moment for that wording to come back up. As we wait, I'd like to remind you once again, if you do happen to have technical difficulties at your table in terms of getting into the speaker queue, just vigorously raise your hand, catch the attention of the others up here, the clerks or whatever, and we'll get you the floor to be able to speak. Also, one more reminder, again, if there's a motion from the floor, you need to also get on the speaker queue at the appropriate time in order to move that motion. Okay, we have the wording before us now. Reporter, if you would read the wording as it's modified.
Yep. That Synod instruct the ED to circulate the Reimagining Ministry Share report as presented by the Council of Delegates and adopted by Synod, along with the suggested guidance, to congregations and classes, and encourage its study with assistance available from the appropriate denominational staff for each context.
That's the amended motion that's before you. And we have three speakers on the queue. It'll be Jose Reyes, followed by Josh Van Drunen and Peter Kornilov. If the second and third speaker would make their way to the microphones, and Jose has the floor.
Jose Reyes, Classes, Arizona. Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if you're going to circulate this report to all of the churches, is this going to be translated into other languages?
I don't know the answer. I'll defer to Steve on that.
If you want their money, I'm sure it will be, right?
nothing more to say.
It's just a matter of doing the math. If it's cheaper to translate and send it, and you'll get the return. Okay, next speaker, Josh.
Josh Van Drunen, Classes, Georgetown. I'm wondering if there is built into the recommendations that perhaps I missed, where the conversation becomes cyclical. Perhaps Synod will be evaluating this in 2021, but I'm wondering if there's a way for us to include that somewhere in this, because I'm imagining that the first year or two there might be some hiccups in terms of how this goes, and having a process to evaluate built in already on the ground might be to our benefit. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Next speaker is Peter, and then Steve Bootsma.
Peter Kornilov, classes Hackensack. I'm wondering if maybe this Mr. Speaker could help me understand it. By adopting this, would we then say yes to the mandate given by Synod 2016 to evaluate, prioritize existing programs and ministries with the goal of reducing institutional footprint? Because I think this Reimagining ministry shares came out of that Synod's instruction, and I think so far I see that we've evaluated and prioritized, but I'm not sure that we've done any of the reducing of institutional footprint. And my apprehension is that by adopting it and circulating it, we're saying yes to the whole thing when only steps 1 and 2 of the 3 were done. And I think Mr. Speaker was on that committee, so
Yep.
you would remember that conversation.
Yep. It's my understanding that Synod 2017 and 2018 did some work to get us to the point where we are today. The whole issue of reducing the institutional footprint, while this doesn't address that directly, what this process allows is that the churches determine what that footprint is. If the money comes in less than what we have today, that footprint will be less. If the money comes in greater than what we have today, there's a potential that maybe that footprint could be bigger. We're 3 years out from 2016, maybe things change, and so this system, I think, allows for a lot of flexibility in terms of what that footprint is, and it's really the churches that are determining what that footprint is.
Steve?
Would I be able to see the top of this recommendation on the screen? I'm not sure if this recommendation is our instruction to circulate, or if we're voting on an adaptation by Synod. Have we adopted this report as of yet?
The trick is that this is a single recommendation that says to that Synod adopt the Reimagining ministry shares, and we are taking that in several pieces. So by the time we get to the end, we will have adopted it. I think Steve's amendment enables us to adopt it as part of this motion as well.
Okay, so that means that that slight amendment changes rather largely what we're voting on in this point. And I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that we were hitting it little bit by little bit, and I'm not sure everybody realized that by the end of those little bits, we had actually adopted the entire thing, because we've never adopted that entire report as of yet. And so it seems a little presumptive in the wording that we're saying we're adopting something as adopted by the Synod, but it's not as adopted yet. So the wording of our motion is a little off.
Steve, am I understanding you that if we change that to say that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Share report and instruct the ED to circulate, does that address the concern you're raising?
That would allow us to vote on something
On adopting the report?
proper, because right now we haven't adopted it, so I can't say vote on something we've adopted, because we haven't adopted. So how can I say do something with what we haven't adopted?
Right, so adding that Synod adopt, moving where we put the adopt would address the issue you're raising. Is that a friendly amendment?
I can make that into a motion to split the question?
Or the friendly amendment could be withdrawn, and I'm not even able to make an amendment, so. But
You didn't make it, you suggested it, and we did it.
right. But Steve is correct. I mean, when are we going to adopt this? And may I bring up one other thing, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
I think you should all know that the committee is bringing forth something that's a little different than what the COD proposed. If you look on page 117 of your agenda, you'll see a timeline kind of a thing where it suggests in June of 2019, Synod considers the proposal and adopts it in principle for consideration by churches. And then a few lines down, June 2020, COD ready, Synod adopts the system in light of the feedback. And so the committee hasn't brought forth a recommendation that breaks it down into those two pieces. And I think the members should understand that. I'm right, am I not, Drew?
I'm working with what I was given. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I see nowhere in the committee's report this two-step process.
Right. I think the best thing at this point, John, maybe you can address some of those concerns.
Yeah, I think the initial question of are we adopting the report is in the recommendation. A, B, C, D, E are subpoints of that recommendation. So I think if we go to the very beginning of this material, that's where we're asking Synod to adopt the report. So I think that was always in front of Synod. And yes, the COD had suggested that there be a two-step process. I leave it to the committee to determine if that was what they wanted to include or not.
Are there any other speakers? Giving you a chance to think about it for a little while, because there have been a number of questions that have been asked, and it's only fair to let those perhaps percolate for a moment as you decide what's the wisest action. Go ahead.
Ron Cool, Classis, Grand Rapids South. Could we ask the committee, did you have a reason for not doing it in principle this year and then sending it to the churches?
I don't recall much conversation. Scott, do you have any recollection of that?
Use the microphone.
Not into the microphone. There we go. I mean, it does say, the first recommendation does say that it adopt the report as presented in Appendix J, which would assume that we're adopting what is presented in Appendix J, but is simply addressing some of the recommendations, but not all of the recommendations.
So what would you like clarified?
Well, has anything actually changed from Appendix J? Or is everything in Appendix J included in what we're adopting?
Okay.
Yeah, I can say at the advisory committee there was no conversation about trying to do something different than what the Council of Delegates had suggested. And so we're asking you to adopt the report as it's presented with the various timelines.
So maybe we should just adopt the report first.
Okay, well, our next speakers are Phil A. Paul, Joel Vanderwerken, and Chelsea Harmon, in that order. Scott?
I'm here as the chair of the committee.
Correct.
Technically, what we're doing is just adopting the report as it is here. That's what all the total of these recommendations amount to.
Phil?
Yeah, Mr. President, Philip Paul, Classes, Chatham. I wasn't sure when to speak because I wasn't sure when we were actually adopting. My concern with the report, well, I mean, I appreciate the difficulty of reimagining ministry shares, is that it seems to me there's a little bit of a faulty assumption behind it, that most of it's operating on just getting money. And I'm glad they want to focus on giving more ownership for the church for setting the tone for this and responsibility for it. But there's nothing in there about giving the church actually responsibility for the ministry. There's nothing in there that is demonstrating to the churches why they should care. The problem with lower ministry shares is not just that there's less members and so forth, less money. It's because churches also are becoming increasingly less invested in the denomination and the ministries of the denomination and more invested in their own local communities and what they're doing. And this report does not address how to allow churches and congregations to care passionately about the ministries of the denomination, which is what is going to be what encourages people to give. When they see that their ministries make a difference and in tangible ways and in ways that affect them as well, then they are inspired to give. And I don't think this report touches on that at all, and I'm not convinced that without that, this is really going to have a big difference on increasing the amount of money that the denomination gives.
Can I address that, Mr. Chair? I thank you for your concern. We had that very same conversation in our advisory committee, and I believe that we responded to that with the motion that passed earlier under C1, material to communicate the denomination's vision for ministry enabled through ministry shares. It's the intention there that there is a communication campaign that goes out to the churches that communicates the vision. We felt that communicating that vision was extremely important, and that would hopefully increase engagement in the denomination's ministries and enable them not only to know about it, but to live into that vision as well.
Okay. Joel?
Joel Van Dorken, Classes Atlantic Northeast. I'm a little confused. What motion are we on right now, first of all?
We are on motion or recommendation E.
Is this part of the text that was at the very beginning of A, B, C, D, E? Is that something that we're considering as a part of all of this, Mr. Chairman, or is that going to be a separate motion at some point?
You asking the first sentence under C, recommendation that Synod adopt? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because it sounds like we're sort of falling over into a discussion about that.
So what happened is the reporter asked that each of these points or subpoints under that recommendation be taken individually. In doing that, it does leave it rather ambiguous whether that first sentence is actually part of the recommendation or whether it becomes then 6 subsequent recommendations on their own. And that is part of the reason why this conversation is happening the way it is.
I guess maybe then with regard to this particular motion, it seems like, from what I've heard, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding something, that this motion kind of presents something different than what's in the, I don't know if you call it the main motion at the head of this, because if we adopt the report, is the timeline different? Did I understand that correctly?
It's not my understanding that there's a different timeline.
The report that Senate is being asked to look at is as it's presented in the agenda, which includes the two-step process that Steve alluded to. So I think that what's in the agenda is still what the committee is being asked, is asking Senate to consider.
Would it be maybe easier, Mr. Chairman, if we table this motion and divide the question so that it's clear that we're adopting the report in Appendix J, and then we can go back to the rest of this so we can have a clear discussion on the actual report? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that would probably be helpful. I think our executive director was just concerned that the word adopted wasn't coming into these recommendations if it wasn't taken from the first introductory line under C, recommendations that Synod adopt. So now that makes it a complex motion. To divide that motion would probably be helpful. I'll rule that because in essence, if there's a request to divide a complex motion, ordinarily that's granted unless there's overwhelming reason not to grant it. So I'll rule that we'll rework the wording there, despite all your wonderful grammar, to divide that into 2 recommendations rather than 1. And you can do that as simply as saying that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented. So that would, in essence, take that from the introductory line and make it a separate recommendation.
Yep.
That's the way to divide that question.
Okay, that's good.
Do you want to see that on the screen before you proceed further? Yeah, I would imagine you would. Scott?
Perhaps a friendly suggestion, Mr. Chairman, that
All suggestions here are friendly,
we just
Scott.
go to the top line under recommendations where it says that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented in Appendix J, and just vote on that.
Okay, that's what
then
we
we
said.
can return back. Okay.
Right. Yeah, that's how we decided to divide the question. Yep. Okay. We ready with it? Okay, we're just giving a second for the speaker queue to sort itself out because perhaps they were addressing this very issue. So the motion that we will have before us now is that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented in Appendix J. To that motion, speaker list is coming back up, so we'll have Chelsea, then Scott Meilenberg, Steve Boetsma, Matthew Staub. The others could make your way to the microphones. First Chelsea, then Scott, then Steve.
Chelsea Harmon, Classes BC Northwest, and I could have just missed it, but is there a plan if this does not go well? Is there a time frame that we're going to review it? Those kinds of questions I don't know for sure, and I would like that assurance before speaking in favor and voting in favor.
I think anytime you propose something new, you wonder what's going to happen, and we have the assurance from John that the denomination's prepared to respond whether we get less or more.
And if I may, that's why I brought up the question of the timeline, in which I was really asking, are you going to adopt the report? Because I think that timeline is crucial, and I think it addresses, Chelsea, your concern, because it says that what we'd be doing here is adopting in principle for consideration by churches, that churches and classes provide feedback, and then that goes to the COD and it prepares that, and then comes back to Synod next summer with the exact system. So again, that's still in the parking lot. It's not driving down the highway yet, but at least it's circling around, getting ready. That's why I'm pleased to know that this motion is on the floor, because I think adopting the report addresses some of those implementation jitters.
Okay, we have a number of speakers with Paul's there also, and I'm going to let you step in for a moment, seeing that this is also involving the COD strategy.
Yeah, this goes right along with what our executive director was just talking about. When we talked about all of this at the Council of Delegates, the original thought for a period of time was we'd be rolling this out right away. And the Council of Delegates said, no, let's give some time for the churches and the classes to receive it. That's why you have this extra year built into the proposal, which is why our executive director is saying it's important we adopt the proposal, because then we know that's how the timeline's going to go. So to people whose concern is, how do we know this is going to go well, we have this extra year, so to speak, this whole run-up year of
introducing it to the churches, introducing it to the classes. This gives the COD and everyone else time to see how this is going, and then Synod next year can look at it as they move the process forward. So if you look at the report closely, you see that there's this whole extra year built in, where essentially we're just getting used to the process as opposed to trying to unroll it immediately to address those concerns.
Thank you, Paul. Back to our speaker queue. Scott and then Steve.
Scott Mullenberg, Classes Minn Kota. I'm a little bit confused because if the advisory committee, Mr. Chair, is asking us to adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented in Appendix J, and then there's nothing substantially different from what we find in Appendix J, hypothetically, if we vote on recommendation 1 there and it passes, my voice is getting a little bit hoarse. I'm just wondering if all the other things then are thereby, by definition, superfluous because we've already voted on Appendix J. Thank you.
Steve?
Steve Bootsma, Classes Thornapple Valley. I know that in the past with our ministry shares, although it was supposed to be a hard number for each of our churches, it was treated more like a recommendation, which is why we got, the number was 60% or so back. In a pledge system, is that a hard promise, and is there a hammer for people that once you've committed to that, is there a hammer or any way to hold churches accountable if our ministries are basing harder budgets with not as much flex room because they're not sure of what ministry shares are coming in? Is there a way to enforce what churches have pledged?
I can respond to that. Built into the system is an accountability at the classis level. And so as we imagine what this would look like, if there's a church that makes a pledge that for whatever reason is unable to fulfill their pledge, the first place that they could turn to is their classis. And there's some accountability based at the classis level. Currently today, there is no hammer. You know, you get a number, what we approve, 346 and some odd change. There's no hammer today. We don't anticipate a hammer in the future, but we do anticipate some accountability and some conversation at the classis level.
Okay, we have 6 names on the speaker queue. It'll be Matt Staub, and then Tom Wolthuis, and then John Tenayanhais.
Matt Staub, Classis Holland. I have a question related to Scott's. So if we're voting on number 1 right now and we adopt that, I'm just curious what happens to the recommendations that we've already adopted. It seems to me, and we've already adopted that we would change the fiscal year. Does that become contingent in some way then upon adopting this timeline that we would be approving in the report if we adopt this number 1 now?
Not sure, John, do you have a response to that?
I think all the items that we've adopted, A through D, I guess at this point, are really creating an emphasis on what's already in the report and identifying them specifically. I don't think there's horrible duplication where you'd have to undo anything at this point.
Tom?
Tom Wolthuis, Central Plains. This proposal I'm speaking in favor of, but with answering some of the comments and raising some qualifications. It is very similar to what we have adopted in our classes for the last 3 years, almost identical. Our experience with it has been mixed, and so there will need to be adjustments. Being a campus ministry that has support from the classes, our budget was reduced by about 15% after this was adopted. Other ministries supported by the classes have even about a 20% reduction. So there was less money submitted when this proposal was adopted. That has leveled off a little bit. Another issue that has been in our classes with this approach, and that is it is reported to classes what percentage or what pledged amount is being contributed by each church, and it ranges from 150% of what their pledge would be on the older format to 0. That causes some hard feelings and possible contentions within the classes where some churches are saying, we're covering for you. Some do that graciously, but some do that very reluctantly. And so there will be some very difficult issues at the classical level, again, if we have to do this both with classical shares and with the denominational ministry shares.
John Tenaienhuis.
John Tenaienhuis from Classes Toronto. I watched the what we used to call the quotas and then ministry shares diminish slowly over 40-some years, and denominational loyalties diminish somewhat as well. I'm willing to be positive about this. I think moving it towards a faith promise or a pledging might bring the ministry shares and their meanings and their missions closer to the hearts of our people. So I think we ought to give this a try. What we have now, you can see the future, what's going to happen now if we do nothing at all and think that it's going to change for the better. So I'm prepared to say we ought to give this a go and ask people to put their hearts into the denominational ministries. Perhaps at classes, if it's mentioned more often, and that we're reminded that we have an obligation as individual congregations and their members to bolster our ministries, it might be a positive change. I'm hoping for it. Let's speak in favor of the motion.
Melissa Van Dyke.
Mr. President, I so hate confusion. And I feel like a little bit of what we're talking about may stem from the feeling that points C, letter B, and the recommendation letter B and letter C potentially are a little bit premature because they assume church participation, which in the Council of Delegates report, there was a desire to hear feedback first from the churches before encouraging these actions or encouraging the COD to send out communication. So I don't know if you can walk me through this, but I'm wondering if it might be the will of the body, given the confusion that's in the room, to somehow rescind those decisions temporarily so that we can talk about what's actually in the report, just to have clarity about what we are actually approving and the timeline that we are approving.
Okay. Yeah, so just so that we don't make what has become a confusing situation even more confusing, I think it was the desire of the advisory committee, rather than coming with one comprehensive motion that would take this whole package in what would look like a simple motion but wouldn't have each of the steps in front of us. They decided to break it down into subsequent steps, with the thought that if each of these steps are adopted, in the end, in essence, what would have happened is the motion that's before us now. We got three-quarters of the way through that, adopted a number of those motions, and then some questions were raised, and at that point, the question was asked, should the whole thing be adopted? So now we're sitting here at a situation where it's three-quarters of the way adopted, and there's a motion before us to kind of adopt the whole thing, and then that creates the confusion, well, is that redundant for what has already been done? And Melissa's question is, in essence, well, can we undo those partial steps which sort of brings us right back to the beginning and say, can we just sort of then discuss the whole report, the whole package, the whole vision together? From a procedural perspective, yes, that is possible. You can do that through a motion to reconsider, and a motion to reconsider would have to be made by someone who voted along with the prevailing, so in other words, voted yes because the motion passed, and in reconsidering it, there can be a motion to rescind it. And if the body decides to rescind it, then we, in essence, wipe that decision off of the table, and then theoretically you could sort of start from the beginning again, and you could just begin with that recommendation, sort of as we have it, that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented in Appendix J. That is an option. That can be done that way. Is it a point of order? Yeah? You never expected me to ask you to make a point of order, did you?
You, Mr. Chairman, have the power to take the hand of history and move it back. We didn't have a chance to speak about the whole concept, the whole process, the whole idea, the whole vision in this large package. I understand why we went to all the sub-motions, but what you could do, and you could rule this, I think we would agree with you, that you could say, okay, we may table it, or just hold off, go back to square one, talk about the issue, and they say, but we already adopted those other 4 or 5 motions. So I think you could handle that in an informal way, and we would allow you to do that, at least I would, because we need to talk about this in a serious way. Ministry shares and ministries from our denomination are really crucial, and we can't just, just throw little rules at them. We need to throw some passion at this and talk about it together.
All right, so we've heard a number of voices, a number of people expressing some concerns about how this is becoming a bit confusing. And so in order to get feedback so that I can best help the body to make a decision that you're comfortable with, I just want to get a reaction from you. And I just want to have a show of hands, first of all. How many of you are finding that this has become very confusing? How many of you think that it would be a whole lot simpler if we could pretend that these motions had not been adopted and we could start at square one to look at the whole package together? How many of you think that would make it simpler? So it's all right. Okay, well, I see that a whole lot of hands are going up. In fact, I see a sufficient number of hands going up to suggest that you would be pleased if we could kind of start over with the whole package in front of us, looking at whether to adopt this, right? So what I'm going to do, based on what I've seen, is I'm going to ask someone who has voted in favor of the previous recommendations to move that we reconsider. That's move to reconsider. Is that supported? All right. Now I'd like to have a voice vote. All those in favor of reconsidering the motions that we've already passed on this here. Please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. Aye. Please go to your electronic vote. We're lining up the yes-no vote. Okay, on the yes-no vote, vote to reconsider. Yes means we reconsider. No means we just carry on the way we were. No. Okay, I think we're close enough to a complete tally. Yes, 117. No, 44. Abstain, 2. So we are in a position to reconsider the motions that we had just passed. I think we can treat them as a whole because you're not just asking to reconsider one of them. So the motions that we passed, would someone move that we rescind? That is moved. Is it seconded? Supported. All in favor of rescinding those motions? Opposed, the same sign. That is carried. And judging from up here by approximately the same percentage as the motion to reconsider. Okay. So what we have just done is we have, and we did that in good faith, that now we can talk about that whole package in the sense as it's being presented to us.
Then I need to bring a new motion. Yes? So then I'll choose to send that as a single motion. So you can go right back to 7B. So the recommendation under letter C becomes the motion with subpoints A through F. So you've heard A through E so far. So the only additional point to that motion then is that Synod instruct the COD to encourage possible additional revenue enhancements for a variety of denominational ministries, for example, fee for service possibilities, ministry-specific fundraising, and report back to Synod 2020 regarding such potential enhancements. So I move the entire motion.
So, Drew, I think what we did is the motions that we had already approved from A through D.
You just rescinded those,
We
yes?
rescinded those, right? And we did that so that we can go right back to considering this as a whole package, which means, in essence, what we are doing is putting a motion on the floor that says that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares Report as presented in Appendix J.
But can I move the whole thing, A through F, along with it as a package? That's what I heard that they wanted.
Well, that's in essence what it would do, but you just read F, and I think that gave the impression to the body that we're voting on that motion.
Oh, no, I just said they
And-
haven't heard F yet, so that in addition to the whole, into A through E.
The motion was split only because we had before us E, which had been amended, and then it's not before us anymore. The motion, as I understand it, that was going to be before us was that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares Report as presented in Appendix J, without breaking it down into all of the components.
So single motion.
At this point, it's a single motion that would include all of these.
A through F. That's why I read F, because we hadn't read that yet. Oh, they split it on the screen. Well, that's okay. We can do it that way, too.
Okay.
So we'll take motion 1 then.
All right, so anyone speaking to the motion that's before us, that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares Report as presented in Appendix J. To that motion, we had a lot of names that were on a speaker queue. I think they've stayed on. Whether you want to leave them on is your discretion. Okay? So we have Mark, and then Carrie, and then Michael.
So Mark Eitenbogard, Classis Ileana. I'm glad that we have an idea of what we're talking about now, and we're speaking about basically the substance of the plan. I wanted to speak in favor of the motion. I commend your work. I wasn't on the committee. I asked to be on the committee, and it
That's
wasn't
unusual.
granted.
You're never denied to get on that committee.
I don't know what happened either, but maybe next time. I am a deacon though, so I'm familiar with the financial matters, and I wanted to speak especially to the idea that our entire structure of our organization is not top down. It is not directed from the management to the churches. It is from the church up. And that's exactly what this is, in my opinion, fixing. It's taking a top-down directive and making it a bottom-up effort, which reflects all of the rest of our organization. The other thing I think it does a great job of is a better idea of properly setting a budget. And when you're in the financial world, the budget is supposed to reflect what you're getting, not reflect the idea that you're expecting to get 60% or something like that. That's just not logical. So I think it does a great job of both of those, and I applaud your efforts.
We've got a number of speakers coming up. I'd encourage each of the speakers to indicate whether they're speaking in favor or against the motion, and then simply address the comments to the chair. So we've got Carrie, Michael, and Joel.
Carrie Gephardt, Class of Celiana. I speak in favor of the motion. Mr. President, I am very concerned that this confusion will distract us from all the work that's been put into reimagining the ministry shares. I find this model much more appropriate with our church structure. As a part of a church who's often felt disillusioned with the denomination, the idea that we could go back home and at some point be able to decide together what we really feel like we can get behind and give to the denomination is exciting, and it feels as if we would be really more connected to the things that we are supporting. And so I speak in favor of this motion, and I'm praying that the confusion with the presentation will not distract us from the lot of the great work that's been done here and going forward with this concept of reimagining ministry shares.
Michael, and then Joel, and then Chris.
Mike Vanderlaan, Classes BC Southeast. I would like to make a motion to amend the motion. I sent it in. I would like to amend the word adopt and replace it with the word recommend, and after report to add to the churches. The reason for the amendment is because normally this body does not adopt reports. We do that very, very rarely, and that's partly why we've gotten into the sticky wicket that we've been in for the last 45 minutes or whatever it's been. We adopt plans or any actions that are suggested in a report, but we normally don't adopt reports. So what we need to be doing right now is adopting the plans that we want to do. We do not want to be adopting a report. We can, however, recommend the report so that the ED's office can then send information on that is pertinent within the report to the churches to facilitate this. So all the things that may or may not have been changed by the recommendations by the advisory committee, that's the plan, whatever the advisory committee has put forward. However, if there are additional items that are of importance that are in the report, we can recommend that, and that can be communicated as appropriate by the ED's office.
Okay, you've made a motion to amend. In order to rule whether or not that can be received, we need to know whether or not that actually nullifies or in a serious way reconfigures the original motion. So I'm going to look for a judgment on that. John, maybe you want to speak to that, or Steve?
I think what we're looking for Senate to do is adopt the report as it's been presented, which includes a session to get feedback from the churches. So it's adopting in principle is actually the words that are used on page 117. So I think if we made any change, it might be that Senate adopts in principle. But to recommend this to the churches, it, in my mind, seems to be very different from what the COD had intended.
Okay. Because to recommend it to the churches would be ordinarily followed up with recommend it for consideration or for discussion or whatever, but wouldn't necessarily imply implementation, which would sort of leave the church hanging at that point, right? So, and that's what my sense was as well. So I think because the amendment to the motion that's being proposed would actually so significantly change the motion, we'd have to rule the amendment out of order. Okay, next speaker, Joel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joel Van Orden, Classis Atlantic Northeast.
Just a moment. Who wants to challenge the chair? I can read what it says. And then you can decide whether to challenge the chair, right? An amendment will be offered and the chair will ask the maker of the original motion whether they'll accept the amendment, and if so, will accept the motion as amended. However, this common practice this common practice is incorrect. Instead, if it appears to the chair that an amendment is uncontroversial, it is proper for the chair to ask if there's any objection to adopting the amendment. If no objection is made, the chair may declare the amendment adopted, but if just one member or more objects, the amendment is subject to debate. Oh, sorry. Motion from the floor. Where are you reading? We're going to caucus here for a second.
I feel like it's addressing this concern.
Right.
You have to table this.
Yep.
Then we need to vote on whether
I'd be
or not
okay with
it's
that.
actually
Right.
That's what the Council of Delegates is asking.
I don't think John's down the same line exactly.
Okay, we'll call session back to order.
Don't go too far.
I'm going to have John go.
Okay, thank you to Kathy Smith for pointing out the correct page number for the reference. It's in the Rules for Synodical Procedure, page 19. C, motion to amend 2. A motion to amend is not a proper motion if it nullifies the main motion or is not germane to it. My question to John Bolt and to Steve Timmermans was whether, in their opinion, this actually nullified the main motion. In their opinion, they said yes. The chair has been challenged. If you wish to continue to challenge the chair, after hearing this reading of the Rules for Synodical Procedure, you may do so. In that case, the body here will vote whether or not they believe that it nullifies the motion. So you may challenge the chair or you may withdraw that challenge.
I believe it is germane to it. It is a substantial change. I'm not expecting it to be a friendly one. To recommend and to adopt are very similar in the sense that we are communicating it to the churches with intention of their involvement and active participation. It is not a gutting of it to make it say something completely different than adopt.
Point of order, he either needs to challenge the chair or not make a speech on the floor of Synod.
Okay.
Correct. Either you challenge the chair or you don't.
I challenge the chair for the grounds I just gave.
Okay, so we're going to vote whether you concur or don't concur. You'll be using a yes/no vote. And yeah, I'm going to explain. So just if you vote yes, then you sustain the chair. That is to say that you agree that this amendment is out of order. If you vote no, then you don't sustain the chair.
The chair's been challenged, and you've heard how you are to vote. Vote yes if you support the ruling of the chair, and vote no if you do not. Yes. Yes. Yes supports the chair. The chair has been sustained.
Okay, so we return to the motion as it was before us. We have a speaker queue of about 8 people. Joel, and then Chris, and then Victor.
Joel Van de Working Classes, Atlantic Northeast. I think, Mr. Chair, I do speak in favor of this. However, I want a little bit of a clarification from the reporter or the committee if I can. As I understand this, we've talked a lot about how this gives a lot of, kind of returns to the churches the source of funding. But one of the things that's come up a number of times in the last, 20, 25 years has been some churches looking for the freedom to kind of determine the ministries that they support and the level of involvement. It still appears that this is the entire package. So if I'm contributing $10,000 to ministry shares, it's to the entire package that's presented by the denomination. Is that correct, or is there a mechanism for churches to decide, I want to give, $8,000 to Resonate and $2,000 to Back to God and nothing to anything else?
I think it's best if I allow John to handle that.
Now we have to tell you our deepest, darkest secrets. Years ago, ministry shares were always turned in, allocated across the various ministries. And we simplified the system some years ago to say, just send us a check, we'll spread it as Senate has adopted it. We still get checks in, though, that are specified. Either they've got an old allocation or somebody has got a pet ministry they want to fund. We always honor what the donor, that being the church, gives us.
Our speaker queue isn't changing. Is it? Right. Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there a technical difficulty with the speaker queue? Previous speakers are not being removed. Chris?
Chris Mauer, Classes Wisconsin, speaking in favor of the motion. I believe that the Council of Delegates and the committee has done a great job laying out a plan for transitioning and reimagining ministry shares that will serve this synod and the CRCNA very well. I think that as we have concerns with regards to what funding is going to take place, if we look at what has been done here, the things that we've approved, the applause that we've given, if we can't take this back to our congregations, to our classes, and get support, then we should be ashamed of what we're doing here. Because we are the church and we are supporting these. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Victor?
Victor Larman, Classes Huron. We're discussing a very significant issue. We're kind of steering the ship in a little bit of a different direction, and so far this whole conversation has been clouded with confusion, and we've been avoiding the main issue, and so I would just call us to prayer, if I may. Could I lead in that?
Please.
Lord Jesus, we come here as your servants, and more than that, as your friends. And we come here as a called body, called to make decisions that are spirit-led for the sake of your church, for whom you died. And sometimes we can forget that when we're discussing matters of finance. And sometimes we have an enemy that can create confusion when he knows that we're talking about important things. And so I pray, Lord Jesus, that you send your Holy Spirit to fall on this place and to fall on us as delegates, to give us a spirit of peace. Help us to understand that what we are doing is kingdom work. Help us to have our hearts and our priorities aligned with yours, and help us, really help us, and we claim that promise from James chapter 1, that if anyone asks for wisdom, that you will give it. So please give us wisdom. We ask this humbly in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Brian Tarpey and Melissa Van Dyke.
Mr. Chairman, at our last classes meeting, we had a report from the Council of Delegates, and our representative was speaking of a vision that the Council of Delegates was working on 5 different values. I think a change as significant as this would do well to be attached with a larger vision of where we're going. For us to make significant changes like that and simply go back to our congregations and say they want us to send pledges, I think those pledges would do well to be surrounded with vision that we could really excite our congregation with, stuff that we're hearing here, and selling this in a way that we believe that this is a good thing.
Brian Tarpey.
Brian Tarpey, Classes Rocky Mountain. Mr. Chair, I'd like to call the question.
Okay. Calling for the question. The implications of that is we will vote on whether or not to call for whether or not to cease debate. That means Those who are on the speaker queue would stay on the speaker queue, but no be added. Okay, so there's a motion to cease debate. Is that supported? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. That is carried. So we have on the speaker queue a number of people. You're permitted to remove your name if you wish. Otherwise, in order, Melissa Van Dyke, Jonathan Owens, and Sherry Tenclay.
Mr. President, I submitted what I believe is a friendly amendment to the motion that we're currently discussing.
After the question has been called and the speaker queue has been locked, you cannot make an amendment. That's correct.
Okay, so
Her name was on the queue before, but she didn't make the amendment before, so.
okay, so I can put it.
Okay. Jonathan?
Is this on? No, it is. Jonathan Owens, class is Yellowstone, coming out of Bozeman, Montana. I just want to speak in favor of the report, just given off some of my background experience as operations manager for 2 very large retail establishments, including backcountry.com. Currently, as a pastor, I also sit on the board for the city of Bozeman. So I deal with a fair bit of funding models and have, some limited experience of it. Not so much in the nonprofit and church sector, but others. If you're going to set forth a budget based on what you want it to do and what you hope you will get, it's a lot harder to make those 2 numbers match up. Whereas if you base off of, here is what I am projected to receive, and base my budget off of that, yeah, you might fall a little short, but you're not percentage-wise going to fall that much shorter than you would if you set your budget and then hope people will meet it. You will miss your budget a lot more.
Sherry?
Sherry Tenclay, classes Red Mesa. Mr. President, I think my perspective, and that's the only one I've got, and my confusion rose because as we started voting, I thought, these are all process statements. And even though I looked at the reports, I missed the content. So consider me a test drive for when we all have to go home and explain this. If there is a way to just give a thumbnail sketch of the content and then talk about the process through which we're going to do that, that might be helpful. In my church, and I do speak in favor of this, in my church for the past 3 years, we have tithed our revenue. 7% goes to the denomination, 2% goes to the classes, 1% goes to a local ministry that supports our vision. Keep in mind that 25% of our congregations are persons with special needs and developmental disabilities, but we've still been able to do that and exceed what was expected of us. So I think it can work, but I agree. You need to cast the vision before we outline the process on how it's going to get done. Thank you.
Jonathan, and then Vern. Jonathan Owens? Oh. Vern? And
Vern
then,
Swearinga,
and then Lisa?
Zealand classes. Since I've been a minister since 2000, I've been a very, very, very strong supporter of ministry shares. Not because I necessarily agreed with the process, but I agreed with the idea of the covenant relationship that I had with my fellow churches. And when I was a pastor of a very, very small church, when I got there, we were not paying much of our ministry shares. And I felt strongly, and I communicated this with our leadership, that this is our opportunity to do something much bigger than what we can do all by ourselves. And that idea of being in a covenant relationship with other churches to be making an impact in the world was a wonderful thing for us to be able to do as a little church. I was a little bit afraid when we talked about changing this whole thing, but when it comes right down to it, I think the process that we're proposing here is much better, because it is going to foster a much more deeper covenantal relationship with one another. And I think that if we can covenant together, and it's going to draw us together as a denomination, and if we don't do that, then why do we even come here to decide things together? But we're here together as a denomination that loves the Lord, that loves each other, and this proposal, I speak strongly in favor of it, because I think it will just strengthen that covenantal relationship that we can claim with one another.
Lisa, and then Benjamin.
Thank you. Lisa Dykstra, Chicago South. Speaking in favor of what I think I'm understanding, but there's a point of clarification. At the bottom of page 117 in the agenda, what it says we are doing in June of 2019 is adopting this in principle. And then next June of 2020, Synod will be adopting it. And I'm wondering if 2020 is adopting it into implementation, or if that process of adoption next year would be that 2-year process of actual adoption, and it wouldn't be implemented in 2021.
The intention is that if this Senate adopts in principle, as per the report, that it would then go out to the churches with a lot of explanation as to what Ministry Shares does, how it works, with the idea that we come back next year at Synod, and the COD, of course, would be processing this right along, and we take any of the feedback from the churches and we see what, if anything, needed to be modified. And at that point, we would hope that Synod would adopt and implement at that point. That then begins the process of the churches working through their pledge. So the first fiscal year that this would actually go into effect is July 1, 2021 to June 30, 2022.
Ben?
Good evening. I'm Ben Vanderwint, and I am a youth advisor. And I do not speak in favor of this motion. I appreciate that the current ministry share system is not 100% effective, but I have a hard time seeing how this new funding system would increase the amount of ministry shares received. If I am correct, ministry shares are the very way that we, as a denomination, operate the many agencies that we have. And I think we heard very clearly earlier today from our ecumenical partners globally that we, the CRC, have a history of having a huge footprint for, as they called, a small denomination. And these shares are the way that we ensure our church can maintain the obligations and the promises we agreed upon in past synods and even this week. So I have a hard time believing that congregations would give nearly as much as they currently do if there was no obligation or firm responsibility. It would be a shame if we had to further trim our agencies down because of this change.
Thanks, Ben. That was the last speaker on the queue. So, Ben, you can go home and say, as a youth advisor, you had the last word on this. Okay, the motion is before us that Synod adopt the Reimagining Ministry Shares report as presented in Appendix J. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That has carried. Yep.
Microphone.
Go to the mic, Marie.
Marie Van Orney, classes, Central Plains. I just want to make sure I put myself in the queue at the right time, because of the way we split this up. If I wait till the end, then it might negate what we just did.
Okay.
So do I put myself in the queue now or at the end of F?
I've got your motion from the floor here. The right time to do that, I think, would be at the end of F, and I will make sure, seeing that you've asked to speak, that you will have an opportunity to present that motion from the floor.
Thank you.
Yep. True.
All right. So at long last, we move on to number 2. that Synod addressed the following recommendations with regard to the report, and so we're going through A, B, C, D, which have been read, along with E, and actually I read F before as well, so I'll just have it out there as a motion.
Okay. You have before you recommendation A. Now becomes 2A. Yes? Yeah, well, I don't think we made any changes until we got to E, right? So, okay, seeing another point of order, Chelsea? Okay. So we have a few points of order and points of clarification, and we allow that. First of all, point of clarification from our reporter. Is it necessary to vote on all of these individually now that we've adopted recommendation 1?
I'm fine with taking them as a whole, but I'm not sure that that was the question.
Well, that was one question, but the other question is it redundant to actually do this, seeing that these steps are all implicit in one which we've already adopted? That's the question.
There are a few things in the additional recommendations that are the recommendations that we added to what was in the COD report.
Okay. So then the second question was, can we do this all together? And theoretically, we can join them all together. But by the time we vote on whether or not to do them all together, we can probably go through them all individually just as quickly, because we'd have to have a motion to vote on all of them together and do the yes vote whether or not to do that. So why don't we just take them one at a time? And we've discussed them already before. They're familiar to us. We went really quickly the first time, and I'm sure we can do it at least as quickly the second time.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to read them again or just present them as a motion?
Put them up because they've been read already before. Have them on the screen. We've already given an opportunity for discussion.
So I'll move motion A.
Motion A is before you. Any discussion? We've got one speaker. Peter?
Peter Zichterman, Classis Northern Illinois. I promise this is not long. Just a point of clarification, point A up there. If we look at the original Council of Delegates reports, the dates are different. Synod, and 2, that Synod 2020 adopt a ministry share rate for a period of January 1, 2021 to June 30, 2021. In the Council of Delegate report, it is January 1, 2021 to June 30, 2022. Which is the intended dates?
Yeah, we noted in our advisory committee that there was an error in the COD report.
Thank you.
Okay. No further speakers. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. It's carried.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I move motion B.
Okay. Recommendation B is before us. Chelsea?
Chelsea Harmon, Classis BC Northwest. So this is back to my question earlier about the review process, and it was suggested to us earlier in discussion that this timeline in B is different than what is presented to us in the report. So I just want to clarify that the review process is in this one.
I would say it is, right?
This timeline assumes that this is not implemented until Synod of 2020, which is, I think, what we had just voted on.
I'm wondering, committee, if you really want Synod to make this request to church councils, or do you want to have the ED work with staff to do that? Otherwise, you're all going to be licking envelopes and putting on stamps. Okay. I would say the same about D and E, of course.
I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
I'm eager to lick those envelopes and put on those stamps.
I'm sure you'll do them all personally, won't you? Okay, with the understanding that this will be carried out through the office of the ED. Melissa?
Yes, I would just like to clarify again the process by which the churches and classes are going to be asked for feedback, because this assumption, in my mind, this motion assumes that the churches are on board and the classes are on board with this. But I'm not sure about the feedback mechanism that we just approved and whether or not that needs to be in these recommendations.
There's nothing in this recommendation that begins before the fall of 2020, which would be after Synod 2020.
Okay. No further names on the speaker queue. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Carries.
I move recommendation C.
You have before you recommendation C. There are no speakers. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. That carries.
And I move recommendation D.
Okay, recommendation D is before us.
There are 4 colleges listed there, and we receive reports for, actually, well, there's 5 colleges there. We receive reports for 6. Kuiper is not listed. I'm wondering if it needs to be.
Name and classes.
Steve Hall, Classes Thornapple.
It's best if John explains this. It's very complicated, so buckle your seatbelts.
All sympathies to Patty, but no, it's the current system is set up that Calvin College is the only school that gets ministry share. But because of the way Synod created the formula back in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, we've come up with a structure that says certain classes will pay more than others because the Calvin ministry share actually gets allocated to the classes depending on how many students from that classes attend Calvin. So if you happen to live in Grand Rapids, in part of Grand Rapids East or South or North or Thornapple or Granville, you get to pay about $98 for Calvin ministry share. If you happen to live out in BC Northwest, you pay just over $1 because you don't have very many students going to Calvin. But what you're asked to do is contribute the differential, and the differential, by the way, is not between the $1 and 98. The formula gets more complicated. But that differential has always been referred to in light of those 4 regional schools. So, but there is nothing actually in the language that Synod has passed that says it has to be only those 4, but those are the 4 that it has traditionally been, and that's why the committee wrote it that way.
Josh? Okay. Any other speakers to this? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. It's carried.
Okay, so now we're on motion E, and we did some wordsmithing on that earlier, and so I'm not sure what state E is in currently, but I believe it's okay. It did come true. A self-fulfilling prophecy. All right, so I will move recommendation E.
Recommendation E in its present wording is before us. Josh?
And Josh Van Drunen, classes Georgetown. I had meant this to be with C, but it's okay. It'll work here. One of the questions that was raised earlier when we were dealing with the overture from Classis Iacota was creating greater connections. And so I'm wondering if churches in the pledge process will be able to distinguish their ministry priorities in their giving as part of the collection of information. Does that make sense?
To a degree. I mean, if you want to prioritize in terms of dollars, you're always, as John mentioned, you always have that option. If you're talking about making a separate communication along with sending in your ministry shares, I'm not sure that that's the best way to do that.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a follow-up?
Go ahead.
The reason for the request is related to the mandate from the earlier synod about prioritizing ministries. And so the question about having different ministry priorities as part of the giving process might bring some clarity within the denominational offices about where the denomination would like to see the first monies go and where, if cuts were necessary, where those might need to occur. Thank you.
Okay, Steve?
Allow me to answer that in two parts. If you read your agenda for Synod 2018, pages 51 through 64, and if you read your agenda for Synod 2017, pages 137 to 179, or if you read Clayton Leiboldt's article, Does Synod Forget?, you will know that extensive prioritization and evaluation has occurred since Synod issued its institutional report, or reducing instruction back in 2016. So now that's at a 30,000-foot level, however, right? So now the next thing is, what will this ministry reimagined approach bring as churches make their commitments and classes talk with each other about those commitments? As someone hinted earlier, I don't remember because it's been a long night, there may be adjustments. Just as in any organization, when there's less revenue than you expect, there will have to be adjustments. The Council of Delegates acts in your interim and will have to guide that process if it's needed.
There are no further names on the speaker queue. Trust that you're ready to vote on recommendation E. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Carries.
And then I move recommendation F.
Okay. And we didn't deal with this yet, so I'm going to ask you to read it.
Okay. That Synod instruct the Council delegates to encourage possible additional revenue enhancements for a variety of denominational ministries. For example, a fee for service possibilities, ministry-specific fundraising, and report back to Synod 2020 regarding such potential enhancements.
Okay. Recommendation F is before us. No speakers? Somebody's pointing? Recommendation F. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It's carried. Marie, you have the opportunity now to speak to the motion that you're submitting from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marie Van Orney, class of Central Plains again. Forgive me if I don't follow proper procedure here. Waiting for the...
You did follow proper procedure. You submitted it, and don't doubt yourself. You're doing fine.
Well, thank you. And do I just go ahead and speak about it?
We'll just read it, and then
Okay.
if you feel that you need to clarify, you can do that. Go ahead.
So as an additional item to the item that we just read, to enhance revenue, I'd like to propose that Synod instruct the Council of Delegates to research some options, and once an option is selected, to assist with implementation and support of a common platform, both desktop and mobile, for online giving at the local church and the classes level. I understand that there are already a number of churches that are using online giving. Our church has been looking and have had inquiries about doing it, but we haven't implemented anything. So we'd like the COD to consider possibly enhancing the current CRCNA donate site. Right now, you can only donate at the denominational level with whichever categories of ministries you choose, but you cannot donate at your own church or classes level. So that's one recommendation or request, to look at enhancing that site to be able to do that. Or I've been looking at the Bridge app that is used in Canada quite a bit. And then there are a multitude of generally available applications out there to look at. So just asking for help and for commonality so that we can, according to the grounds that I've listed, is reach maybe an economy of scale where it doesn't cost every individual church as much to manage their online giving. As I just mentioned, we have received several requests for online giving, but we haven't implemented it yet. The younger generations are much more inclined to do financial giving or to do giving online. And then I've also been looking at some statistics and heard from people, in spite of the fees that we pay for those applications, they do increase revenue significantly. And then if we do it in one place, we can have centralized tech support. Thank you.
Okay. The motion is made and supported. Discussion on the motion. John?
There's a couple of technical issues that make this fairly easy to do in Canada and very difficult to do in the U.S. Canada has national banking, and Terry Velboom, through the Burlington office, already offers a lot of centralized services for the local church. The issue that we'd have in the U.S. to get any single system recommended, or even one or two, is the vast number of individual banking setups that the individual churches have. I would have no problem working with our banks to try to come up with a listing of potential options that maybe would be made available to the churches. But I think we'd probably be going down the wrong path to say, here are the 2 or 3 CRCNA endorsed pieces. I'd rather have a listing that the churches could connect with, and then on their own make sure that this was implementable with their local banks.
Okay. Other speakers? I trust that you're ready to vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. Aye. I trust that that has failed.
Mr. Chair, this concludes the work of Advisory Committee 7. And I'd like to just take a moment to express some thanks to Council of Delegates for their work on ministry shares and for their courage and faith in putting forth a very bold proposal. I'd also like to thank John Bolt for his work on behalf of our denomination. He serves us extremely well, and he deserves our deepest gratitude. And I'd also like to thank the chair of our committee, Scott Vanderploeg. The committee did good work too, and so we should thank them as well.
Drew, we'd also like to thank you for leading us through that. It was not always an easy walk through, a little bit of a rough ride at points, but you did well leading us through it. I'd like to just suggest one more task for you. I'd like to suggest that maybe after this you talk to the IT people and the newsroom and see what our ratings were for this prime time. See whether we should recommend to Synod 2020 to do financial matters in prime time again.
We just busted the Nielsen's on that.
Oh, okay, let's find out. All right, friends, I think we're close enough to 9 o'clock. We've had quite a session, so in a moment we're going to wrap up. We're going to have a concluding prayer. We'll be coming back together again tomorrow morning to continue our work. We also have the opportunity for relaxation and so on at Calvin Seminary. And tomorrow when we come back together, we will resume our conversation when we have the opportunity to do that around, in addition to the candidacy reception, we'll be dealing with 9B and 4A. After that, well, maybe we'll see. Right? Okay, closing. I don't think there are any other announcements, are there? Closing prayer.
Sun Jin Kim. Thank you.
다 같이 기도하겠습니다. 참으로 중요한 자리에 종이 있게 하시고 우리가 있게 하심을 감사를 드립니다. 저희들은 하나님의 선하신 뜻과 섭리를 신뢰하며 이곳에 CRC를 있게 하시고 CRC를 통하여 하나님의 나라를 이루게 하시고 하나님의 뜻을 이루어가게 하심에 참으로 감사를 드립니다. 200여 년 전 이곳에 이 영광스러운 교단이 서게 하시고 지금까지 놀라운 하나님의 은총을 누려오게 하셨으며 그리하여서 2019년 총회를 통하여서도 하나님의 귀한 역사를 이루어가는 이 일에 저희들이 결정하고 또 심의하고 검토하는 모든 일들에 대해서 오직 하나님의 뜻에 준하고 성경적이게 하시고 인간의 얄팍한 지식과 경험과 의로움을 가지고 결정하는 일이 없게 하여 주셔서 이번에도 그 은혜대로 하나님의 놀라운 뜻이 서가는 귀한 역사가 있게 하여 주시옵소서. 참으로 긴 회의 시간을 통하여 저희들이 회의가 목적이 되지 않게 하시고 회의가 정말 미래지향적이고 순수하고 귀한 회의가 될 수 있도록 하나님 도우시기를 바라오며 잘 쉬고 또 내일도 새 힘 얻어서 하나님 기뻐하시는 이 회무를 잘 마칠 수 있는 우리 모두 2019년 총회가 되게 하옵소서. 감사하옵고 우리 구주 예수님 이름으로 기도드리옵나이다. 아멘.